before we get started, I want to illustrate that these are not stock settings, and the importance of that is when you get your TV is likely going to look really cool and very blue like this, okay? And so the comparisons that you're going to be watching people do 9 times out of 10 are going to be really cool and really blue on YouTube. Now, for $5, I offer a service where I fix all that and I get it to look more correct and more true to life. The benefit for you is that you can actually see what you paid for instead of like having to pay somebody $500 to do the same exact thing and actually do it worse. So I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. So the first thing is vivid. A lot of people know about vivid mode. It's the most vibrant mode in the television, but it has its problems, which it's just overly bright. You go to low power, it gets a little bit better. She now looks like a little bit more of a human being, and you can kind of see a lot of that detail return back from vivid, where everything's just kind of like really just blown out in general. The background is the biggest indicator, as we can see like right back here. When we go up, it's just overly clipped, and then we go back down, and then there it goes, kind of returns a little bit to normal, but she's pretty much dead. Now this dead, pale, faded look is the reference accurate industry standard that all of the calibrators are going to adjust your TV to and say, hey, you're welcome, call it a day kind of thing. And so what I do is I go in and I push past that, and I give you something that looks way beyond that point, to give you something that actually restores not only color, depth, dimensionality, and all that good stuff, but gives you an image that kind of resembles what you really want to see and what you paid for, right? So if that's something that interests you, make sure you join, because definitely I got you covered on that end, and you can see a lot more of the detail that you paid for. But with all that being said, the big winded opening to this video is to let you know these are not basic settings. So you are going to have to adjust your TVs in order to see the full impact of it. To the left, we have the Samsung S95B. To the right, we have the TCL QM8, which also goes by the name the TCL QM850G. Now, we're just going to dive right into it, answer questions as to what these TVs do and don't do. So I'm going to actually pause here because I think this is very important. What you're going to notice between these two sets, and this is, I have to say this is the biggest difference between, mini LED and OLED, even QD OLED. The brightness is a factor. So as you see, the 2300 plus nits giving you a world of difference, as we see over here in this area, where on the QD OLED it is dimmer. Now, that is not to say that the QD OLED is the worst TV, because it is providing the better picture. Skin tone's far more natural, and every single little detail pops out way more than what we have on the mini LED, where it's just bright. So that's the first thing that you have to notice. The brightness is going to be a factor. Now, as this plays, you're going to notice something that happens that's really interesting. Again, more details on the Samsung S95B. However, when we look at the mini LED, we're noticing that we're having much more in the way of luminosity and color throw, particularly the color volume. Now in English, all this means is that the extra brightness allows things like the green on the back of the neck to be more prominent than it is here because of that extra headroom with the brightness. Again, not bad on QD OLED, but it's not as bright or luminous. Now, luminous does not mean accurate. So essentially you end up in a situation where, yes, the color is technically brighter and it opens up more expression in a way, but you're not necessarily getting the purity behind it that you would see that's true to life. And I think that's a term that we need to familiarize ourselves with, the true to life, because again, the image to the left is giving you what's called a true to life image. You're seeing that detail in the skin and every little thing. Now also, I do want to point out the QD OLED is black crushing by comparison in this darker scene to the mini LED. That's another benefit of having extra brightness. You don't experience that crushing down effect to the degree that you would on something that, again, isn't self-emissive. So every technology has its pros and cons, and that's kind of what we're here to talk about. Now, as far as which TV I personally prefer the QD OLED. Now, that does not mean that the mini LED is a bad TV. As you can clearly see, it's bright, it's good, it's got deep black levels, but it just isn't giving me that realism that I really strive for in all of the imagery that I look for when I'm buying a TV or when I'm adjusting to get the best out of a television. I just have more out of the S95B. I mean, iconic scenes like, red pill, blue pill, I mean, it's just so much better on QD OLED, and you really find yourself enjoying it. One of the things I'll tell you, again, when I talk about color purity, very hard to show off now because the camera's trying to rack the exposure for both TVs, and this TV being 2000 plus nits, it's very difficult to do, but the color in the jacket is just so much more lifelike on the S95B, along with the skin tones. The skin tones on the TCL way more pale by comparison, and these are some of the things that you're going to be able to pick up as you start going through, scene by scene, example by example, and it really gets to a point where it gets kind of difficult depending on what you like. Like if you like brighter colors, you're just going to gravitate towards the TCL more. If you like darker colors that are more cinematic, you're going to go more for the S95B. That does not mean anyone has a wrong choice here or a wrong preference. It just means that it is a preference, and so it is very much going to be kind of like a play it close to the chest kind of thing. If we look at YouTube videos, we can clearly see that there is a world of difference in color that'll come out on the Samsung S95B in terms of expression. Now also in terms of processing, that's also one of the biggest kickers, where every little detail, and I mean every little detail, is showing up on the S95B, where the TCL just not quite able to hang as well as we would hope. But again, I don't think anybody truly would be surprised by that particular outcome. I think that's kind of to be expected. But again, both TVs are providing an excellent image. It's just the depth and the realism that really makes you feel more like you're outside is coming from the S95B, where the TCL is just unable to produce that effect. Foliage, again, way more realistic on the S95B, and I'm going to pause it here. And for anybody that wants to replicate this, this is the Sony 4K demo video scene of Kyoto, Japan, and this is from Look and Think. It's a YouTuber on obviously the platform we're on here. So if you wanted to replicate that with this YouTube video that I'm using to show you guys this, that's the test. So when you're looking at this, it's important to note, like, I don't know how well this is going to show up, by the way, on YouTube, but like I'm seeing every little shade of green and like in between colors and all the foliage, all the wood colors, everything on the S95B, where the TCL, it's really looking a lot more washed and pale, especially like in a lot of the brighter areas. It's just falling apart a lot more. And so it's like the brightness is there, but again, like in scenes like this, like you have a well-lit foliage type scene, but the TCL just can't hang. It's not putting the depth where the depth needs to be because it can't, right? So yes, it has 1,000 zones of mini LED control, but that doesn't mean you're going to be able to do what we have over here, where down this pathway here on this creek, we have it nice and dark, but then the leaves and all the little rays of lights are illuminated as they should be. That's the kind of refinement that is pretty much exclusive to OLED at this point, and like really, really, really old LED TVs that honestly you can't even get on the market anymore. But again, it's important to notice these differences, because like a lot of people are going to be like, well, what's the difference between a QD OLED? Why should I pay more or less, or whatever the case may be? And that's really the difference. It's the depth, it's the control over the lights. And honestly speaking, mini LEDs still, even with TCL and their 1,000 zones, is not there yet. The global brightness is just way too bright. It's an over brightening issue, if I'm going to be completely honest here, because as the demo plays out, you can kind of see, like, look at that. I mean, my God, like that. This is my first time seeing this, by the way, so it's shocking even for me. Like, yes, that's brighter, but good Lord, the detail, the purity of the red is like immediately apparent, where that doesn't even look like red going up on that side there. A little bit better once we get to the darker portion, but once we are here in the brighter area, it doesn't look like red. Now, one can immediately introduce two arguments here, and that's where director's intent becomes very difficult to produce. On the one hand, you can say it was the director's intent to produce a Japan that was shrouded in the tree line, and therefore that is more accurate because that is showing you the tree canopy better. But then on the other hand, we could say, well, no, it's actually showing rays of lights blasting through the trees and overexposing like it would on a really bright sunny day. Who's to know what conditions they shot in? And that's why director's intent is quite literally impossible to replicate, and that's why I don't think anyone should be chasing that. What I do think people should be chasing are two things. One, your preference, how you like to watch TV, and two, what looks natural and what looks right. And honestly, to the left, the S95B looks more correct, as to it looks more like they were trying to shoot a scene that was, again, just a little bit of sunlight and mostly dark, because I see shadows and things like that the TCL just can't produce, and those shadows didn't just create themselves. So the more natural image is on the S95B. And when you like assess image quality, you kind of have to go back and forth like this, bit by bit, trying to find what's right. Again, I don't have a problem with TCL and how bright they are. It's just they're overly bright in a lot of ways. Now, that does have a benefit here. in this particular example, the foliage is far more visible here than it is on the S95B, where it's just crushed out. Now, this is also due to camera technology limitations. So if this is one of those situations, like I'm pretty sure it is, there's just usually no way you're going to be able to capture all of the color in the sky, right? And show it in SDR, right? With the foliage having full dynamic range, something's going to go amiss. And then if you factor in something like OLED, like the S95B, that has a bit of a black crush issue anyway, it gets very difficult to see dynamic range. So the extra brightness or headroom on the TCL, while yes, it's totally washing out the sky, it doesn't look anywhere near as nice as it should, you still do have that nice foliage. And so it's kind of a trade-off. You have to really, per your person, per what you're looking for out of these examples, decide what is for you. What is the thing that you look for when you're watching these TVs, because only you'll have that answer. For me, I kind of tend to prefer something that's like more S95B-esque, but again, to each their own. If you're an anime watcher, you're going to want to have the S95B over the TCL the QM8. The reason for that is because, as you see here, it just gets really pale. On older shows like particularly Bleach, where they naturally have a washed art style, it's going to look really bad comparatively to the S95B, where you're getting all the colors and all that goodness. So that is something that you're going to have to consider. I've never seen a reviewer talk about this aspect of reviewing TVs, and when it gets to anime content, it's always like, what the heck is going on with my anime? And it ends up looking like crap. So if nobody told you, I did. Now, in terms of connectivity, the TCL is actually more reliable than the Samsung. My S95B just randomly dropped out in the middle of doing the test. So whatever you want to say about budget TVs, you kind of have to table it a little bit and realize that they've actually come a very long way, because here we are with one of the big name brand TVs, and it's not able to keep the signal when you're using an HDMI splitter. It drops out and it's like, oh, I don't know how, HDMI cable disconnected. So now you've got to do some troubleshooting. This is very important, especially for people who are looking to run multiple monitors through splitters or different kind of intricate setups. It's something to consider. The TCL is actually better in the way that it was built from that aspect, at least a hardware aspect. Now, in terms of gaming, if you're like, hey, I'm looking to buy one for the next gen consoles, PC, whatever, immediately the S95B is going to be your better choice. When I tell you the amount of depth that is coming out of the city right now, like as we're just looking straight down the middle, I mean, that building is so prominent. I literally see every little detail in the windows that I just don't see on the TCL, despite it not only being the bigger display, but also the brighter display. This is extremely important because this tells you that even if you buy a bigger, brighter display, you're not going to necessarily see that return on your investment in terms of more detail. This is very, very important because this is also a mini LED television that's supposed to get closer to OLED, and a lot of people can kind of miss that detail a little bit. And so as we're looking, we can kind of see what I'm talking about here with the building and all that good stuff. Again, you're walking around, you kind of see every little bit of detail. Also, motion is smoother on the S95B, which frankly, when it came to like TV shows and stuff like that, I was not seeing. But in terms of gaming, for gaming, it's just way smoother, like way smoother. I'm seeing a lot less motion blur is what it is. There's just a bit more in the way of motion blur on the TCL, and also there's a little, it's very impossible to see. I'm realizing that now as I'm looking at it. There's a little black line, we call it dirty screen effect of some sort, that like when you start panning fast that you'll end up seeing. So that's one of the unfortunate things for sure, but it is what it is. Now let's try to go over to the building and try to get a little bit more in the way of some details so that you guys can kind of see what I'm talking about. Okay, so as we're here in front of the building, you can kind of see what I mean as far as details. You just kind of see a little bit of everything, and it's pretty impressive, frankly. Like, it's just a treat, honestly. And then again, it's not that the TCL is doing bad, but comparatively, like all the details to obviously like, and again, this is OLED's biggest strong suit, the self-illumination aspect of it is like every little window, every little office, you can see inside of it like very clearly. And on TCL, it just looks more two-dimensional. And that's the biggest thing here. Like the QD OLED is able to get way, way more three-dimensional, and it provides a certain level of just like aesthetic that just does not exist on, something that's not QD OLED. Or rather just OLED in general usually has that as a benefit, but particularly this OLED, the S95B, is really good with creating depth and dimensionality and things like that. Now again, it's not to say that the TCL is not able to do that. As you're seeing, we are clearly able to do that, but what I'm going to try to do now, I'm going to try to like speed this up a little bit, because they say you can speed up a little bit. So I'm going to try to speed up a little bit so you can get an idea of like just how much better the motion is on the S95B. Like as we're moving around the city, we're kind of weaving around. You don't have the same level of motion blur that you have on the TCL, where things are definitely harder to see as I start panning. This is going to be a big issue as you get into shooters. You're definitely going to have this issue. Now, the only exception is when you're at a really high refresh rate, then of course you're not going to have those problems. But if you're at something like, you know, the Matrix demo, where it's a 30 FPS game, and spoiler alert, most of the new games that are coming out, basically 30 FPS, you're going to have that problem a lot. And I feel like this is something that a lot of people aren't really talking about at this point, but it's definitely going to be an issue. So yeah, you guys can clearly see what it's like. Trying to move fast here and focus on what I'm saying at the same time can be a little bit difficult, because I want you to see the motion differences, and there's just a lot more blurriness happening on the TCL than on the Samsung. So that's one aspect of it. Also, again, as you see, the colors are vastly different. The colors are so much better. I mean, look at her red pants right now. Like, I'm positive that will show up on YouTube. Like, that's a vast difference in just what you're not getting, even though you're paying about the same money. And actually, I mean, yeah, you're sacrificing screen size if you go with the S95B 55-inch for the same price, but I mean, you're getting the better TV also, so you kind of have to weigh up how important size is too. A lot of these TVs are just big for no reason also. That's like one of the things you have to kind of consider as well, which I know might not be ideal for some people to kind of point out or say, but it is absolutely the truth. So the last thing we're going to do is we're going to go like Grand Theft Auto on this thing, and we're just going to drive a car and just kind of hop in and do what we're going to do. All right. If I can remember how this whole process works. I remember handling on this is pretty bad. And this will further help you see how motion is, right? And it's not great on the TCL. It's not bad, but it's just not great. And I think that's really the takeaway. So as we're driving around the city, things to notice is like, you know, frame dips you can't really control, I imagine, but the one thing you can control is like motion artifacts, and more particularly, again, it's the motion blur. There's a heavy emphasis. I've even noticed this with Hisense TVs. Motion blur is really difficult, and things get really, well, not ideal. Things start getting fuzzy and blurry the faster you go. Now, ironically enough, as we have a brighter highlight, the Samsung does appear to have more blur to it, but as I look at both, they're kind of about the same. Like, it's weird. There's more shakiness to the TCL, and there's more blur on the Samsung with that particular example. But again, I guess with these things, they can trade back and forth depending on what you're watching and what you're looking at, and that's also the other thing that makes TVs so unpredictable and difficult to kind of piece together. But overall, I would give the lower frame rate motion to the S95B. So, I mean, more or less, the moral of the story is really simple, right? The TCL is a great TV. I think if you're somebody that wants a good TV that's not going to break the bank, the TCL is obviously a no-brainer. And the Samsung S95B in their own right, you just have to know what they do and don't do, and I think you'll be fine. Now, I would obviously show movies and stuff like that, but YouTube copyright, obviously that's not possible, so we're just going to have to use video games and whatever footage I was able to show you guys, and hopefully that's going to be good enough. But if you have specific questions as to how these TVs perform, it's really simple. The S95B is going to be the better picture quality all day, every day. The TCL is going to give you more size and a better value as far as the size for the value. Better brightness if you're in a room with a lot of windows, and it doesn't have black crush. So that's the advantages over the S95B. But again, it really just does depend on what you're looking for. So if you have questions, make sure you ask down below. And if you want to get the settings that I'm using, because I am not using stock settings, make sure you join the membership, and then you'll be good to go. And that being said, I want to thank you guys so much for watching the #1 brand in honesty. Until the next video, I'll see you guys later.